you, Dr. Witt. Appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
My pleasure to be here.
Yes. All right. Well, you were just talking about Mal Moore in the picture up there, and I wanted to start out with a story from the first day of class this year, which was we came in and we sat down, and you were talking, everyone sitting in this exact classroom, and you pointed up to this picture right here, talking about the best thing you ever did was hire Nick Saban. And then we get to the end of the class. It's like a 2-hour class, only once a week, but we get into the class, and then as soon as he stands up, one of the kids in the class raises their hand and goes, "Oh, Nick Saban just retired," like the news came out while we were in class that day, right after you just pointed that out. So that was just something that was really interesting. But you were talking about Mal Moore, like how important he is. Like obviously all the athletic facilities over there are named Mal Moore. But yeah, what is it like actually hiring Nick Saban, that whole process of like getting that successful of a coach actually to do it?
The process of hiring Nick Saban was probably the single most interesting hiring process I've been through in well over 50 years in higher ed. Mal Moore deserves 90% of the credit for closing the deal. He was in Florida. We thought 3 days in a row we had Coach Saban and Miss Terry on the plane to come here. And 3 days in a row we didn't have him on the plane. And Mal finally closed the deal. And his final words to me were, "Dr. Witt, he's agreed to accept. You go explain to Trustee Bryant we're paying him $4 million a year." And what Mal was joking about was when Coach Bryant was here, Coach Bryant had a policy. He would never accept a salary higher than the president. Mm-hmm. Coach Bryant never earned more than $100,000 a year from the University of Alabama. Now, he earned very good side fees, but it was a very different world. Mm-hmm. And I went and met with Trustee Bryant, and he just said, "Get him hired."
Yeah.
And we did.
Yeah. So obviously, like that was the guy you wanted, and he stood out. What was it? Obviously, more of probably the athletic director and different people, but how was it? How'd you end up on that decision where this is who we want? This is our guy.
We were looking at 3 or 4 people very closely. We knew we had to get it right because we had made a couple of miscues. We had to get the Alabama tradition back on schedule. The University of Alabama is far more than its athletics program, far more than its football program. But that said, football has helped define who we are.
Yeah.
And the reason this next hire was so important was because the man we asked to leave, Mike Price, was not part of our value system. And we had to have a coach that not only could be successful on the field, but from my perspective, equally important, successful the right way. Mm-hmm. Never, ever somebody that would cut corners or compromise. And in everything we learned about Coach Saban, he could and would win the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was about to say that's one thing, especially listening to a bunch of things he talks about, is kind of just the stuff he puts into the players is even more important than kind of the even on the field stuff. Is something obviously like Saban's definitely known for. I love listening to all of his motivational quotes. They'll pop up on my Instagram and stuff all the time. Yeah. And you mentioned how football was a part of this. One thing that always, like, it was just funny to me. We were going around. I don't exactly remember what it was because I don't think it was Bama Bound because I don't know exactly what it was. It was some time I visited the university before I came my senior year. And it's the building behind Gorgas. I really like the building behind Gorgas. It looks like a kind of castle thing. Mm-hmm. I always like that. It looks really cool. But the little area behind it, I think it was that area. We were walking on a tour of someone. And someone mentioned how it was used to be the all-boys school. And it said they like barricaded the doors or something over there and basically said, we want football and we want girls, which I thought was hilarious because I was like, look at the school now and they're talking about football's never going to be big in the South. Now it's the biggest thing in the South and it's huge and makes all this money and everything. that was just something when I first came here. I was like, that's what you need.
It is very much part of the university, and a key part of Coach Saban's importance was we felt he could win the right way, and everything we learned about him indicated that the student athletes as individuals were important to him. I remember a story once. We were talking not long after Coach Saban came, maybe in the second or third year, and he had to have a young man leave the team. Details are not important. What's important from my perspective was he worked to help that young man identify a Division II school that had a scholarship that he could have that would allow him to earn a degree. Instead of ending up back on a street in Mississippi with no life in front of him, Coach Saban put him back on a path. And that was his value system. And to this day, I believe part of his success with our players were they knew he cared.
100%. One of the quotes that stood out to me whenever he was talking about, it was at some post-game thing, but it was about talking about someone giving kids second chances and how he had a kid that was struggling with something. I don't know, he didn't say exactly what it was, and there was all this media attention, all this stuff about it, saying he should be kicked off the team, he should be all these things. And his exact point was like, where would you rather him be? You would rather be him here, doing the training we're doing, all this, where he can actually have a chance to get better, or would you rather have him go back to where he was in the streets, doing whatever he may be? Obviously, he wasn't in a good situation if he got into some sort of negative news and like enough to get kicked off the team. Like, it's better for them in both ways, on the field and also just in their life in general. And that's something I guess is huge. And when you talk about players, they always say they love Saban.
Yeah, I think you've identified one of his most important characteristics. He obviously is a successful coach, focused on the abilities of a young man to be important to Alabama football. He was, in my perspective, equally focused on how important that young man's future was and what Alabama football could contribute to that.
Yeah.
And the longer I was around him, the more I admired him.
Yeah, no, it was always something to me, like, growing up. We moved to Alabama when I was in the third grade, or in the fourth grade. It was the day after the third grade, because my brother played football, and I was also playing football. And my brother was like 6'2". He was a lot better, a lot taller than me, so he was a little bit more recruitable in football. We even came here to a camp at Alabama, and he did real well. And the coach, he was 6'2", and I remember the coach told him, "I love you, all this. I would love to offer you, but Saban said if you're not 6'4", we can't offer you," which I understand because there's big dudes, and that's one of the advantages they have is the size of their line. And you see the same thing with Georgia.
Yeah.
So that's something that's really important. But it was just really cool eventually getting here. It's like, obviously Nick Saban's like the best ever and all this stuff. Yeah. So being in there working out and seeing him run through and all this stuff with the team was pretty. It's just cool experiences.
And if you go over to Coleman Coliseum, July and August, starting late June actually, and I have a locker over there and go over there to exercise. In July and August, without exaggeration, you'll see 8, 10, 12 pro players.
Yeah.
Over there working out. But they're not just there to work out because of the facilities. I think this is not something Saban has ever said. It's my read on it. They're there in large part because he was more than their coach. Mm-hmm. He became a father figure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. And I've seen countless numbers of players in there working out. When we're in there working out, older players people coming in with all the NFL gear and stuff on. I've also seen, I don't know, it's crazy. You never know who you're going to see when you're down there in the weight room. I've seen Thomas Rhett in there one day. I walked in just to run through to say something to my coach, and I looked over. I was like, "Is it Thomas Rhett? What is he doing in here? What's going on?" Tim Tebow was in there one day. The other day it was Rajon Rondo. I was like, I did not expect. Why is Rajon Rondo in here? It was pretty cool though. There's all types of random people.
I've learned to stay off of the weight bunch because I guess it's 45 pounds on the bar, and I put 20 pounds on each end, and for me it's a moral victory. And guys are looking at me like, what in the heck are you doing? But
Heck yeah, no, that's what we do at track. We're all in the weight room. That's the one thing we can be up there on like whenever we get football players coming in there, they'll be impressed with the lifting we got going on. Because, I mean, we got a kid on the team that can power clean 405. So, it's insane. Yeah. There's some crazy strong people out
amazing.
There. 100%. All right, one big thing, obviously, about Saban this year is, especially he just retired, is now they're hiring Coach DeBoer, and he's been here, and obviously we've seen the amount of people that left initially, and now the people coming back, and all the different recruits being signed. So, what do you think about that hire and the team in general going forward?
I think we've made an extremely successful hire, and I think one of the things that facilitated attracting a coach of the caliber we attracted is the program and the value system that he was inheriting. Mm. I think I've yet to really talk with him, but yeah. I think he knew coming in that all of the values that were important to him, all of the resources he would need, he could keep his values, he would have his resources, that this was a university and this was a program that would, my perspective again, come close to a coach's ideal.
Mm-hmm. I was about to say, I would think that's the biggest job that there would be ever is who's going to replace Nick Saban. I've been asking people probably for 6 to 7 years, just asking people like who they think, who you're going to get. You know, it always used to be Dabo, and then that fell off, and all these different things. I can say this: I don't think ever did someone ever tell me Coach DeBoer. That was never one of the answers I got. But I remember calling a few people, like mainly my dad and different people when I got hired. My dad was super excited. He's been a high school football coach for probably 30 years now. He was like, awesome, I love him, all these different things. Yeah. So I'm excited to see. I was excited. They won a national championship my freshman year. I've never been like the strip that night. I know it was put all over the place because it was COVID and all the things that happened, but it was incredible. We had a funny story about that. We have a guy on our team. He graduated, I think, last year. He wasn't on the team this year. His name was Bobby Colantonio. He was a national champion for us, and he actually has a crazy story of his freshman year. He was like number 5 or 6 all time in high school throwing the hammer. He came in his first year, and they found like some sort of cancer in his leg, and then he ended up recovering from that. Everything came back, still became a national champion in the weight throw and all this stuff. But he's the type of person. He's from Rhode Island, so he's not the most friendly person. I love Bob. He's awesome. But if you initially when you meet him, it's not going to just be like I'm going to be nice to you to be nice. So and like everyone on the team was telling me like, hey, you gotta don't just walk up to him and talk to him. He ain't trying to just talk to you for no reason. All this stuff. And I was like, okay. And I was cool with everyone else on the team, and I was cool with him. He would say whatever, but he never went out of his way to say something. And it was that day. It was the day of the national championship game. And he walked with me in the weight room. He said, "What are you doing tonight for the game?" And I'm watching it with some friends, like at the house, I think. And he was like, all right, if we win, you better be at the strip. He was like, you got to be there. It's so fun and all this stuff. And it was a lot of fun. We ended up seeing him out there and all this stuff. And the next morning, I walked up to, we still had COVID testing. We had 7 a.m. COVID testing the day after the national championship game. They probably did that on purpose. But we still showed up, and I remember I got out the car, what's up, Coop? And all these things. So it definitely, worked out and all that. But we've had people that didn't do that as smoothly as just to say. But I love Bob. Bob's the best. But it was something incredible. And then actually finishing out my career, like I guess I still have one more year left, but I don't even think I'm going to be able to make it to the games and all the things next year. So all finishing out with Saban and everything, I don't know. It just feels like one of the best. Like if you could pick a best thing, like being with one of the best coaches ever at your school and all that stuff. I remember the Heisman Trophy ceremony actually being there when Devontae Smith won in the COVID year. I was sitting in my room like, wow. Yeah. Like, and I would see Devontae and them walk around every now and then. So it was just crazy to see all the people that you do see here because it's so, like, I don't know. It's something that comes with Saban.
It's a program that's easy to be proud of, and it's a program that added a lot to the university, not just in terms of success on the field, but success the right way, and turned into an asset that helped the university graduate young men and women with the values we hope they would have.
Yeah. And when you have something like, obviously, Alabama football's always been big and people want it to be good, but having the success that they've had and all that, what impact does that have on not just like the athletic program, but just the overall school in general, especially being the president during that time? Like what was different from the way you were looking at things, being that the football team was being that successful? Like, did it make much of a difference?
From my perspective, it did. When I arrived in 2003, the university wanted to grow in size. At the time, 3/4 of our students were from the state of Alabama, not just from Alabama and surrounding states, from Alabama. We wanted to be a national university. Saban and his success brought us visibility that helped that. It made it easier for us to grow the University of Alabama into the type of university we wanted it to be. One of the things that impressed me was I can't remember a time that we asked Coach Saban for his help during the recruiting process, whether it was meeting with some people or whatever it would be. He never ever said no. He obviously, his primary focus was and should have been the football program, but he cared deeply about Alabama as a university.
Yeah, I was about to say. I mean, I know there's nothing like when there's a football game on the university and how many people show up and different things. And basketball games are good, and there'll be a lot of people down there, especially the big games. I've been out there before practicing, and the game is like 8 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night, and it's 10 o'clock, and like there's a long line of people already waiting. And I remember seeing that one day. I was like, oh wow. But yeah, there's the impacts of the sports on just the atmosphere it gives. It's just something. It brings something different.
It's unique. When I arrived in 2003, I thought I really understood big-time college football coming from Texas. Texas had a great program, still does. But until you've been here, I don't think personally you can truly understand the true magnitude and impact of big-time college football.
Yeah, no, it's the biggest thing in any college football in the world, especially SEC football, Alabama football, Georgia football. Those things are just the biggest things out there, 100%.
Yeah. And Alabama has always done it the right way. I remember I started work at Alabama on Saturday, March 1. 60 days later, on May 1, we terminated Mike Price as our football coach. Not because he wasn't a really good coach. I think he was and went on to be. But he made some mistakes in terms of values and couldn't be part, in my judgment, of the Alabama value system and the Alabama tradition. Somebody asked me, didn't I believe in second chances? And I told them, I do. I've had my share. But the important thing to remember, and as an athlete you understand this, when a football coach can't go in to a home, sit down with mom and dad and look them in the eye and say, send your son to me, I will help him grow into the type of young man you want him to be. Nick Saban has always been able to do that.
Yeah.
The man we had to ask to leave would never be able to do that again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a huge part of the recruiting process, 100%. There's something just about a coach, especially I feel like with the parents and different things. I know in my recruiting process, my parents were always on me about what I was going to do and explaining different things and all this stuff. So there's almost nothing more important than that in the recruiting process, 100%. Yeah. One thing I do want to ask, going away from like the football and all that, is obviously you were the president, and it started in 2003, and then I think it was 2012 when you ended up becoming the chancellor. What it was,
Mm-hmm.
and so you explained it a little bit in class, but like, what was the reasoning for staying that long and then ending and then moving on to a different position at that time?
A major part of the reason I decided to leave Texas after well over 30 years and come to Alabama is Alabama was committed, in terms of the leadership of the university, to growing significantly in size, to going from being a state or at best a regional university to being a national university, to attracting even stronger students, and to be part of that building process as what I knew would be the final step in my career was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. From the beginning, I structured how I allocated my time to fit with that mission. The University of Alabama was fortunate, in fact, I would say blessed, to have Judy Bonner as our provost, because she, in effect, managed the day-to-day operations of the University of Alabama, which freed me to be on the road in many ways as the chief recruiter.
Yeah.
At the time, as I said, 3/4 of our students came from the state of Alabama. And when I was recruiting on the East Coast, West Coast, Florida, wherever, Chicago, they had never had a recruiter from Alabama. And I can't tell you the number of high schools I would walk into, and when I left, they would say, "We've never had a university president in our high school before." And that's what I felt it would take to open the door for the University of Alabama. Yeah. And that's what happened.
Yeah, you kind of the same going and talking out to people and actually going out there. That was one thing for me that was definitely interesting with Dr. Bell. I think it was in somewhere downtown Dothan. I remember there was some sort of dinner recruiting thing there, and it was cool just to hear from the president of the university sitting there. It was definitely something that was
makes a difference.
Yeah, 100%.
Makes a difference.
100%. And obviously going from the president to chancellor and now being the honors college professor, or being a honors college professor, among other things that you do. What made you, because obviously I was in the honors class this year, go from being in that role to now being the professor teaching this, especially the one UH 350, A Republic If You Can Keep It. What was that process like?
When I was approached at the end of my presidency of Alabama with the opportunity to be chancellor and work on developing the system, I felt it was an opportunity I could not turn down. After I'd been there about 4 years, I realized I was approaching the end of my career, thought about it a lot, and realized what would mean the most to me would be to end my career, in effect, where I began it, in the classroom. It had been a long time. I went back to the classroom. I was trying to think about what I would want to teach. And the more I reflected on what our country was going through, the more I decided that what I would want to do in my final teaching years was work in a seminar setting so I would have one-to-one contact with students and focus on what I felt our country needed to be thinking about if our form of government was going to survive. And most people look at the United States of America and are not worried about our form of government. If you look at republics, which is what we are, from a historical perspective, there was work dating all the way back to the 1700s that looked at how many republics have come and gone. And I started thinking about, were our young people aware enough of what it takes for our form of government to survive, to play the kind of role that I knew they would have to play if this form of government was going to be here when I was long gone. And I became concerned that not enough of our students were thinking about that, and felt that as the final chapter in my career, if for a few years I could work with students like you and have you complete the semester aware of what it would take for America to continue to be the republic it was, if I could do that, that would be a good way to finish the run.
Heck yeah. And I can tell you, I've been in a lot of honors classes. I don't think I'm actually going to graduate with honors, even though I've taken almost all the classes, just because it's like an extra $4,000 I have to pay for the extra classes. And I was honestly taking them the whole time just because I would love to go to my classes. My kinesiology classes are fun because I like that, but honors classes are the ones I would pick out, the little topics that I liked, and they would be really like actually interesting to go to. So I had a good amount of honors classes that I really enjoyed going to. But this was by far my favorite. I tried to get into it, I think, 2 or 3 different times, and always would get in late, and finally got into it this semester. So I was happy about that. I guess the only other time it would be best is next semester. Next semester is going to be probably the best one with the election and all that. It's going to get interesting.
One of the challenges is the class meets here, which puts a constraint on it. One of my favorite stories is Mal Moore's granddaughter was in this class. And she said the only difficult thing was being a student in this seminar and looking up at the wall and having her grandfather staring at her.
Yeah, that's fair. No, I love the class because it's something that, I don't know, me and my friends always talk about a lot just because, I don't know, I've always been interested in politics. I would always, like, over the summer and when I was growing up, I mean, as far back as I can really remember, I would always say the summer with my grandparents, and then they would always be watching the news and all these different things, and I was always making arguments with them and all this different stuff. So I kind of always been interested in it. But there's a lot of people that aren't. So it's kind of tough sometimes to find the right person to really have a good argument with, where they won't just be like, yeah, man, I don't know. You know what I mean? And so it was really cool. Whenever I read the description of the class like 2 or 3 years ago, I was like, I got to get in that one. And I think it did a good job of it because there was a lot of times in the class that we came to questions that it was a lot of, I don't know. There's like 6. Well, there's a part of that I could say something about, but then there's 6 other problems with that. And you don't even know if you could even do that, if that's even a viable option for something to actually get done. So I think it challenges you a lot in that way. But it's also fun because you're talking with peers and also with you and the guests you had in here with us. It was kind of like getting different perspectives on things. And the only thing I think would be, I like that it's smaller room class, like we talked about the kind of in class, because you're kind of more open to talk when it's less people. I don't know, I feel like I don't know how you could open it up to just a little bit more different like opinions on different things, which obviously more people you would assume you're going to have more different opinions, but it's obviously a give and a take there with a big enough class.
You're raising a valid point, and I've thought about if we take it from this class size, 11 people, to 20, we'd be able to make it available to more students. But to your point, we'd also increase the likelihood that we would have even more diversity of opinion. I really liked it during the semester, and there were a couple of students that tended to disagree with each other most of the time. But if it was a little bigger, I think we would have had an even stronger level of discussion. And I think it's important we have that discussion, because without going back into the semester, much of what I was exposed to going through elementary school and high school is not there anymore. And I'm concerned that we're growing generations of younger people who don't have the kind of background that your mom and dad had, that I had, that you're in part having. I think about people who come to this country and apply for citizenship, and the fact that most of us probably couldn't pass the exam to become a citizen that they have to pass.
Yeah.
Something's not right about that.
Yeah, I remember having to take that test. I think I was one of the first classes that actually had to take it in Alabama, and it wasn't that difficult. But I definitely, if I would have not studied at all,
Yeah.
and you just put it in front of me, that would have been close. I think I may have could have passed it. But once, with one little day, it was like, all right, these things are coming back to me, learning it from when I was younger. But that's something I actually think is good, important. Like if they have to take a test like that, especially graduating, especially that it's not that hard of a test. It's just basic information that you should be able to know. That is, I think, a good thing for the country in general, for people to have a basic knowledge about certain things. Because that's one thing that is, I think, especially, I would say about the financial market and different things, is a lot of it is just getting the information. If you have the right information from the right different people, there's a lot of things that can be, you can get done with that. But getting that information's pretty difficult in certain
Getting the right
instances.
information, understanding the process. I think reaching a point that when you're out of college, settled in the beginning of your life, having a value system that causes you to say yes if the Boys and Girls Club calls up and asks for a volunteer, if the city council needs somebody to run, having a perspective of the importance of involvement that causes you to be willing to take that time, because a critical part of the strength of our form of government is that we're involved.
Mm-hmm.
When we stop being involved, then we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, and that's one thing I like about the class in general, because it's, if you're talking with someone and you disagree with them and it's in a setting where it's easily avoidable, most of the time that's what you're going to do, because you don't, why am I going to sit here and argue with this person? And sometimes you should do that. That's not, there's times where it's like, yeah, this is just okay. We're moving on from this situation. But in a class setting, it's more of a...
You can do it.
Yeah, and you're going to be safer with the things you say,
Yes.
because you know you're going to have to come to class next week.
Yep.
And I think it makes you be more articulate with how you say and state your point in certain ways. And there was definitely times I would argue with people, but sometimes we would agree on everything, but then one thing we would have a slight disagreement on. So it's okay, let's argue about this.
And that's
this little point.
the climate that we were trying so hard to create here, where you could strongly disagree with somebody for the better part of 2.5 or 3 hours. And next week, it was as if nothing had happened that was at all negative.
Yeah.
And people were able to get to know each other enough, particularly in a class this size, that I think they felt more comfortable really saying how they felt. And you could watch that level of comfort grow as the semester went on, that they could say something pretty strong in disagreement, and that person was still happy to see him next week.
Yeah, definitely. You could definitely tell by the end of the semester, there'd be a lot of times that I had something that I kind of wanted to add onto another point that I would do early in the semester if no one was saying something. But then by the end of it, there was 6 different people talking, and it was just better listening to all the different opinions and just thinking about what it was. Because I know Alexander was another one that talked a lot in here, just like me. And me and him agreed on most points, but there was little things that was disagreements. And he knows, I think, a lot more than I do, like on the actual solid details. Because he would ask me questions that I would be like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know the exact answer to that question, but he was, I think, a great asset to have in the class to get specific things done.
Alexander, you, Riley, 2 or 3 other people stood out because you spoke out. Others, have viewpoints, but they're hesitant to state them. And even though you try hard to pull them into it, it's going to be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, a few years back, I had one young man, I'll never forget him. He was sitting right in that seat where you are now, and he leaned over about an hour into the class and he said, "Dr. Witt, can I be excused? I need to go out in the hall." And I looked at him and I said, "Certainly." Yeah. He said, "Sir, I need to go out before I say something I'll regret." He was that close. He was very conservative. We had a very liberal student, and he knew if he stayed here much longer, he'd say something he'd feel bad about. So he went out.
Yeah, that's good. You got to get out of that situation. No, that was one thing. I guess this year I was hoping that to have. I feel like we disagreed on different things, but there was a lot of very basic things that we'd agree on. I was hoping there would be someone that disagreed a little bit more, because I don't know, it's fun. I always like that. I had a class that was actually in the room like right next to us right here. I forget the name of the class, but it had I forget the teacher's name too. He was a German professor, and
Herwig.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And he was that class was also awesome. It was kind of the same discussion style stuff, and there was a lot more disagreement in there among the people. It was a lot more this side and this side, and I remember arguing. It was weird because I would argue on both sides of it, in different times.
Yep.
Because we talked about some wild stuff in there. Like I remember he was going through all right, these are all the options you have to talk about. I was like, oh wow, this is nice. We're gonna get into everything. This is good. And it was real fun in that class because it was almost like you went around the table.
Yeah.
Okay, go. What's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on this?
He's a great teacher.
Yeah, he really was. He had a definitely. It was just a really good class, I think, the way it was set up. And that was another thing. I was talking with the guy on the team I was telling you about, Power Clean 405, the other day. He just graduated in African American Studies, and he was talking about in his later classes how it's more discussion based, and they talk about different things, and how that was different from like the beginning classes he took, especially like the intro level stuff. And he was like, I wish the intro level stuff would be more like that, to try to get to draw people into that more, to be like, he was like, because that I would love going to class, but he was like, some of the intro stuff, it was tough.
It's a real challenge. You have a certain amount of material that you want to deliver, and what that usually means is we're talking at you. By your 3rd or 4th year, we want to be in a position where there's enough of a foundation that we can go from talking at you to talking with you. And that's an important transition.
Yeah.
Because when you go from looking at a class of 200 or 300 people where we're talking at you, and we want to get down to a room this size where we can talk with you, That's an important transition. If you never get beyond talking at you, then you're going to leave here with far less than you could leave here.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. I think that's one thing that in my classes, and it's just I think the teachers individually. It's also the size of the classes. It's very hard to do it in a size like a 200 people class. I think one of my professors probably could do it. He's just the way that he is. I don't think he couldn't. I don't think he could be in a class and not teach that way. But in our classes of like I think it's like 50 people in the kinesiology classes. Dr. Reitmeyer, he by far my best teacher I've ever had in any of the kinesiology or any of them things, just because of how interactive he is.
Yep.
You'll sit in class. There'll be plenty of times that I would not paying attention, but not paying attention like 100% of the way. And you're sitting there and he's asking questions here, and so you're getting perked up and looking and typing. He also did that where he had all the notes in there for you, but he like certain parts you had to type in as you were going, and that helps with just remembering what's going on. And I took a bunch of classes with him that were not easy classes, but felt easy because if I went into class, I would actually be taught in the class what was going on. And if he asked a question like we're talking about the Krebs cycle or some sort of statistic, that's what my class for this year was more like the experiments and stuff like that. And he asked like, okay, what is this? And then no one answers it. He's not just going to be like, all right, it's this, and then move on. He's going to be like, all right, this is why it's this, and explain the whole situation. And I just think that's something that as a teacher or as a student is like incredibly important, because it's so easy to just get distracted if you're just getting talked to, especially when you have a computer out supposed to take notes. You got your phone, you're maybe supposed to take notes, or whatever, you may be writing notes, whatever it may be. It's just so easy to get distracted in that situation. And I've had plenty of classes that have been that way. So I just really appreciate whenever because it's also an effort from the teacher. And he also explained like the thing with Dr. Reitmeyer. He's I feel like he got so much praise that it's kind of like a little bit of you don't want to make other teachers look bad in a certain way. And he was like saying like, this is my position. I'm allowed to teach a lot more because I don't have to do the other research. I forget exactly what the specifics of it are, but a lot of these teachers have a lot more responsibility in other things just outside of teaching. So it's going to be different.
Not just outside of teaching, but if your teaching responsibility is one where they're going to put you in the room with 200 or 300 students, and I have the luxury of being here.
Yeah.
It's a whole different world.
Yeah. That is very true. And I don't want to say I had bad teachers. I had a few teachers, really only one teacher, that I felt was just always pushing something. But in the class, that's what the class was. It's an English class. I think in English, that's kind of what happens. It's, you sit there and you read it, and what do I think this means? And so, like, I don't know really what else he would say. Like, he's going to say what he thinks that it means and analyze the quotes and stuff. I guess I would have analyzed it differently in other ways. But it was just easily amount that were just good teachers that taught stuff normal, basic, and then 5 or 6 that are like really good teachers that I felt like I was in there and actually engaged and wanted to show up to class.
You've had some remarkable teachers in your area. In that picture on the lower right, the man on the left is Rodney Brown. Mm-hmm. He was retired by the time you started. He taught in the training area, and I had heart surgery a while back and had to go through some pretty extensive rehab. And Rodney I knew from being over in Coleman, and for over a year, as a friend, he came over to the house, and he used what was in the house. There are 15 steps between our first and second floor.
Yeah.
And we started out, I'd go up and down once, and by the time we finished, I could go up and down 15 times without stopping.
Yeah.
Remarkable man.
Heck yeah. No, that's one thing I guess in kinesiology that I've just been really interested in is exactly stuff like that, is how there's all types of stuff around the house you can do that's no money, no anything.
Oh,
If you have a hill, you can do crazy other amount of stuff.
steps, or even sitting in the living room in a chair,
Yeah.
stand up without pushing off.
Yeah.
You do that 15 times, you're going to know it.
I'd feel that if I did that right now.
He was remarkable. If there's anything good about heart surgery, the faculty was pleased to learn I had a heart.
Oh, yeah. The one thing I want to get into, just because I really did enjoy this class, and I would always, the discussion questions, I would always be interested in. A lot of times I'd write a bunch of things down on it, and not even talk about it, just interesting things to look back on. And so I picked out a bunch of different questions we had that I was interested in asking you, just to also just see a little bit what the class is about exactly, and all the stuff that we actually did talk about. And I want to start off with one of the things that I guess it was one in the very beginning. One of the things, I think it may have been actually the first week we talked about it, was how the founders and as the Constitution were written, the founders were talking about what needed to happen and the type of people that needed to be for our republic to be successful. And they said they believed that we had to have a virtuous people. And the question that was asked was, do we have a virtuous people today? And a kind of a group consensus was a little bit of not the same as it was and different things. And in my mind, especially the first time I read the question, I kind of was like, of course, there was the amount of things that happened back then, being that slavery was a thing, the amount of discrimination among certain different things. And then now, I had thought of that progress. That's what immediately when I first read it, that's what I went to. But then there was family and other things that, and when I came into class and heard that I was before I even got to say, well, this seems stupid. That's what I was thinking when I first read it. And then when we came into class and I heard that opinion, I instantly was like, well, no, okay, that is the different side of it. So what do you think about that? And do you think that we do have a virtuous people today?
I think our form of government, our republic, will do best, will thrive if we have a virtuous people. And as discussed by our founders at the time they were drafting the Constitution, I think in some ways it was easier because they could look back on what had been before our form of government and realize what a huge step they were taking and how important it was to live up to the value system that was at the core and the center of what they were building. I think today it's harder. I think one of the biggest challenges our country faces, maybe the biggest in my view, is the steady and significant decline in the family. I was talking actually with a police officer a couple of years ago here, and he was talking about a young man who had taken some bad turns in his life, a young man who already had a child. And the officer was saying he just couldn't understand the young man's behavior. And my response was, how do you learn how to be a good father if you didn't have one? Mm. And we have far too many children growing up today who don't have what you had, what I had, which was a good family with a good value system that we could learn from. And when you're married and raising your family, as I look at my family, which is obviously, I'm looking at grandchildren now, we had the benefit of being able to watch and learn. A lot of these young people today don't.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And one thing, especially to that point, that I've seen, I guess, a lot in my life is with, I guess, how important teachers, coaches,
Yeah.
People in the community that do group organizations, whatever it may be, just kind of those low level authority figures that are actually one on one with the students, especially the younger kids, to give an example and do different things that can be just like literally life changing in certain instances.
It can, and without overstating it, if you look at particularly many young men growing up in economically disadvantaged areas, you will have a higher percentage of those young men growing up without the benefit of a father in the home. And I don't think it's overstating it to say that for many of those young men who were athletes, their coach is their father. That's where they learn their values. And I remember being in a discussion once talking about the importance of putting more emphasis on sports for women in high school and in college, but particularly high school. Because as a high school athlete, you had the benefit of having coaches that played a major role in your life. A lot of the young ladies growing up in your high school who might not have had a father figure at home didn't have the coach you had. Mm-hmm. And I think in many ways, coaches in high school are not recognized for the importance of the role they play in the lives of many of their athletes.
Mm. Yeah, that's one thing I can say. Having really good coaches before and having some coaches that I didn't think were the best it can be very important because it's someone that, especially whoever's directly your coach, is a lot ways like the position coach that you have a lot of times is more, you just feel more personal than the head coach because the head coach, it's the head coach obviously. I was incredibly lucky. My dad's been a coach his whole life, so I kind of, that was a kind of already a coach in that like aspect, I guess. But when you were talking earlier about the rise in single family things, one of the questions we had on here was about says in many of our states, federal and state welfare combine to pay more than work. Like should this be allowed, and what can or should be done to address the situation? And one thing, especially I wrote about in my final paper, was how it also incentivizes like single parents, and you'll get more money, and you'll actually get money taken away if you get married, even if you still are not making that much money at all. It's not like you get married to someone that's making a lot more money than you, and they get cut off. So, do you think that has an impact on that situation, and what can be done about that?
I can and probably should only speak for myself. I think the support system that you're talking about was designed with the best of intentions to try to figure out how can we put in place a government program that can help deal with some of the challenges created by single parent households without at the time fully understanding that if people elected to look at that system and use it that way, it could turn into something that incentivized not having a traditional family. Was it designed with the best of intentions? Yes. But there are a lot of things in life, not just social programs, that are created with the best of intentions, and then you deal with some of the negative aspects of it. I don't know what the answer is. But I do look at numbers. Marriage rates are declining. Birth rates are declining. The number of children being raised in a traditional family structure is going down. And I don't see any mechanisms evolving that'll help young people grow up with the values they need to have. And I don't think that's necessarily a function of education or wealth. My mom and dad grew up in the Depression. Neither of my parents graduated from high school.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of their children, the three of us, graduated from college. So it's not just the formal education. But I believe, and it's not just spending money in another government program, we need something to develop, I believe, in our culture today that helps deal with the decline of the traditional family.
Mm-hmm.
Young people are at a real disadvantage if they grow up without that.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, I do too. I think I've seen many times, especially in my high school, where a lot of the situations would be that, and then it's not, of course, not all the time. There's definitely people that just either have it instilled in them by themselves, or have someone that instilled it in them that maybe not be the father, whoever it may be, that they just act different because they know what's right and what's wrong. But then you have others that don't, or kind of can rationalize it in different other ways. And I just think that the best way, it's exactly kind of what you said, of the intentions are there, and they're really good, and there definitely should be ways to get help as a single parent, because it's something I believe that should be done by two people. There's a reason. I think that's the way it is, but I think I guess the thing I think of whenever I think about it is, you fall into the situation where I was talking the other day with the same guy. He's from the UK. He's from just outside of London, and he was talking about some people he knew that his parents, their parents, were able to get basically doing I don't know if it was unemployment, but somehow government program, getting money, some sort of welfare issue thing, and but to be able to do that, they were doing, like, their work they would do would all be like cash in hand stuff at different places. So they wouldn't get any of the money they had taken away. And through that program, it was also able to pay for their kids' school, all these things and he was telling me the story, and I was like, oh, well, that's actually pretty cool. And he was like, yeah, then both of them, like, he was like, both my friends, or when they were growing up, they're a little older than him, but like when he was growing up, there was his older brother's friends. He was like, they both went to college, they both became like engineers. And he was like, and now they're both doing what their parents were doing, and on the same program, doing stuff cash in hand because it's easy that way. And I was sitting there and I was like, well, that story was almost perfect. Like, if they would have been an engineer somewhere, that sounds exactly like what your intention would be. But I guess that's just an unforeseen little problem that I guess you can see, especially recently, is rising. And I think there's other factors in society that you can say are going towards that. I think there's things that are also pushing people away that are not just that system, just societal factors in general.
And more is being pushed on non-parents. You can think back to your high school years and the coaches you've had. Your dad was a coach. Mm-hmm. In fact, I would say you can think back to talking with your dad over the years, or him talking with you, about the number of young men who were in a far better place today because they had him as a coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely, and that's something he would always talk to me about, and he would talk to me about it, but I would always be there when he was talking to the team. So when he's talking to everybody, he was talking to, like, we're all in the room, so I'm listening to all this stuff. And a lot of it was that. It was about how you were doing this. Well, why am I doing this? It's like, well, there's going to be a day when you go to work and you're 15 minutes late, they're just going to fire you. So you need to be here on time, and all these different things that were. It felt like at that point, like, what's the big deal about it? But then it's like he's reinforcing why it's a big deal and all these different things, and that's just, I guess, incredibly helpful. And just there's times where I think it just happens where you're going through a rough day or whatever it may be, and you need to get something done, whatever it is, or a hard workout, especially for me, like hard workouts and different stuff, and just also having the experience of doing it many a times before. That's another thing of sports I think is so beneficial, is doing really tough things and getting used to it. And just, I think, once again, I guess some kinesiology, working out is awesome for you, but that's just...
I think if more young people had the opportunity to become aware of the difference they can make as they become young adults that are not related to having significant wealth. When you think about it, there are a lot of children in elementary school whose two most important meals a day are the breakfast and lunch they get in school. Mm-hmm. What happens on the weekend? And it doesn't take much in terms of a volunteer effort to have a program where non-perishable lunches are packed up that can help them through the weekend. One of the stories I heard when COVID first hit that stayed with me were many public schools were wrestling with, they could no longer have the lunch and the breakfast that these children had. And then some superintendents figured out we still have the money for the lunches and breakfast, and we still have our buses. So we're going to run our school bus routes, delivering non-perishable breakfasts and lunches. Mm-hmm. Brilliant.
Yeah.
One of the hardest jobs that anybody had during that time was driving one of those buses. Because when the bus stopped at one of its regular stops, the driver knew which children normally got on, so he or she could provide them with their lunch and their breakfast. But there were siblings there asking, do you have an extra one? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine saying no?
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. And that's, especially, I know, especially at my school, with my mom was a teacher, my dad was a coach, so I would hear stories like that because they would know more personal things about different people. And yeah, when you think about it that way, it's good to be grateful for certain things in different ways. Yeah. And it's always, I also think, shows the importance and the possible importance of volunteer efforts in that
the way. Difference you can make.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And just little small things like that that really can be helpful. Yep. And I one thing, I guess, through church growing up and different things, I was able to go out and do small things like that. And it feels good, obviously, but it also just, it makes you want to do it again.
It's a learned process. Part of the reason we encourage students in honors college to get involved in some sort of program is if you can personally experience the satisfaction that you get from making that kind of difference, you're going to want to do it again.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. And that's one thing, I guess I did FCA growing up, and especially in high school, we did a few different things, and it just gives you some motivation to do things. And for me, to try to be successful, to be able to make it more bigger effort and help more people, because that will be able to do it in different ways, especially like my personal training and all that. I want to try to maximize the amount of people that I can get to do it, because I think it's beneficial. I think people need to have it. I think it's something that can really help.
Yeah.
Yeah. One question I did want to ask one of these on here was, especially because you were the president of the university, obviously being the actual president is a different thing. But one of the questions we talked about was obviously the roles of the president and how difficult the job is, especially nowadays with the amount of things they have. But one of the questions we had that I wanted to specifically ask you was, what is the public education role of the president? What do you think that it is, or should be, ideally?
I think in part it's defined by the nature and current status of the institution where you're serving. I think the role and responsibility of the president of the University of Alabama is significantly different from the role and responsibility of the president of Shelton State, and the role and responsibility of the president of Columbia University. In part, it's a function of the complexity of the institution. Columbia has probably more doctoral programs than in Alabama. Alabama has programs that a Shelton State doesn't. The challenges confronting the presidents of those institutions right now, if you turn on the evening news, you'll see the role the president of Columbia is playing if he or she doesn't get forced out before dark that day. Far more challenging than the role you would play if you were president here. I think the role differs significantly across institutions, but across all institutions, compared to when I first became a president of a campus in Texas, the job is more difficult today because the job has become more political, in the sense of you're dealing with more political pressures and an academic environment that is far more inclined to challenge and confront than when I was in school. If you would have asked me during my undergraduate years, which would have been 58 to 62, would we get out and protest and shut Bates College down? Hell no. I don't think anybody would have thought about it. Today, if you're at Columbia and something happens you don't like, you're ready to go. And that's both good and I think bad. Good that it's forcing institutions to listen and hopefully, when appropriate, respond. Negative that there can be less well-intentioned people who realize they can bring the process to a halt, whether or not they're right or wrong. I don't know what a student at NYU or Columbia is supposed to do today. It's hard to go to class. It's hard not to have class disrupted. The environment is tense. To have to walk to class through protest groups and groups of police, that's not ideally what it should be. We're blessed that we don't have that here. I think increasingly in today's world, one of the responsibilities of a university president is to stay close enough to the campus environment that you can sense when you need to reach out and help give people a chance to vent so that you can reduce the amount of pressure. It's like any vessel, if you will. If pressure's building and you don't reduce it, the vessel can blow up.
Yeah.
But if you can bleed off some of that pressure, everything's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And today, I think presidents need to be both more sensitive to the need to do that and more skilled at doing so.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder to be a president today than when I was.
Yeah, I bet that the protest stuff that's happening now is definitely a tough thing. Especially, I think there's more factors other than just people on the campus wanting to do it. There's people from outside the campus that want these things to happen and know that the campus is a way to
Perfect way.
allow it to happen. Especially when you get some kids that, that's once again a thing that I think the intentions are good, in a way of, I don't know about their exact intentions and some of the things that they say, but in a way of, you have the right to protest. You have the right to do that. That is something that is allowed. But when you go in and start busting things inside of buildings and places, it's kind of different in certain ways. But I think the interesting part is, it's a university and it's all that, but it's insane how that's such national like news, and how important that role is in that specific instance, even though in my mind a lot of those factors are the government. It's 100% almost very political things that lead directly into that situation. Like you said, it's that person's trying to keep their job at the moment, trying to get this stuff figured out.
It's what's unfortunate, and at least I'm not aware of an answer. If you want to draw attention to an issue, a university is a great place to do it, because it's relatively easy to get a group worked up about it, particularly if it's an outside group providing funding and organizing expertise.
Yeah.
A lot of these protests are very well organized by very sophisticated, experienced people, and it can be very difficult to manage that process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing I think it was the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, I believe.
Yep.
He made the comment whenever I think they brought in I don't know if it was SWAT team, whatever team it was, I think it was at Columbia, and he said that they had the amount of people that were, or multiple people that were outside of the university. They knew it. They knew that they had connections to some organizations that not good, and that's why they ended up making that decision. But it was something I guess I was happy to see him say with that things over the past. Another thing that we talked about a lot in class too this year was the border, and that was another thing that kind of surprised me that he came out and said, because especially in New York they're also very welcoming to all the people coming across, and then when it got to a certain point of having to deal with certain things, he had a press conference where he said he think it was going to be the death of the New York City.
You can't be a sanctuary city anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to the beginning chapter of our textbook, one of the first points they made, one thing a country absolutely must have to be defined as a country is borders.
Yeah.
And when you don't have borders, it's hard to have anything approaching what's traditionally defined as a country.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if you're a country like ours. You can go over to Europe and say, okay, Germany's borders, hypothetically, are being challenged, but everybody who speaks German is a German.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do over here? We have all sorts of different languages.
Yeah.
And right now, we're struggling to have borders. Part of having a border, what's related to it, is if you elect to cross that border, enter a country, you're either explicitly or implicitly agreeing to go through certain changes. You're going to accept the laws of that country, the just laws of that country. You're going to learn the language if you need to. You're going to assimilate and become part of that country. The breakdown in our borders is putting all of that at risk.
100%. And I think one of the biggest things is just the amount of new people, and then especially in New York, when I think comes to where it's kind of going to be, a topic, especially with the election, is the people that were looked over or had to move out of their schools to help with this situation, and they know that their governor and their mayor were the one that were saying, yeah, we can do this, and then it ends up in this situation. It's kind of like blew up in their face almost a little bit.
I think they may well have been well-intentioned at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard to look at somebody saying we're going to be a sanctuary city and say that's evil.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're dealing with the reality of it, the economic impact of it.
Mm-hmm.
It can get out of hand quickly.
Yeah.
And there are communities along the Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, portions of the California border. I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah. I was about to say, it's been millions of people. And we were talking about it in class, the border bill that was proposed that didn't go through, and how the $20 billion was going to be spent. And then I went and looked up like different things on how it was going to be spent, and it would basically still allowing over 1 million people a year, yet then spending $20 to fix it, but then still allowing over $1 million a year. Just didn't make sense in my mind. But I guess that shows how many people are coming across now, saying that's a big help to lower it to that number.
And you mentioned, I think your mom was a teacher too.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine being a teacher in a K through 12 school that's had a dramatic increase in enrollment, probably beyond capacity, and you're now teaching, instead of 20 or 25, 30 or 35 if you're lucky, including 15 who may not speak English.
Yeah.
And you're teaching science.
Yeah, it's tough.
How do you serve the students who speak English and the ones who don't know whether the book's upside down or right side up?
Yeah. I was about to say, I think that's like an additional cost almost, in a way that is just kind of not, it wasn't seen initially, because if you have that many people, it's like, that's a lot of different people that you have to translate to do different things or certain ways. And we were down in Gainesville this week for SECs. So in Florida, it's a little bit more common,
Mm-hmm.
all the different things. But we were at the hotel, and it was normal housekeeping, and I just was like, yeah, we just need some towels. And she was like, okay. And then she looked at, she started typing in her phone. She was like, she basically said, I don't speak English, and then like held up Google Translate. So I just said, I just need towels. And then she handed me the towels. But she was super nice. But when it comes to teaching and actually educating someone, that's a massive thing to look at. That's a challenge that is tough, I guess, because the language is, I guess, a super basic thing of how you can communicate with someone. If I can't speak the language, it's very, very difficult for us to communicate.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And one thing, especially I think that's big with a combination with the border and having a bunch of people that you don't really know who they are in a bunch of big cities around the country, combined with this issue that's been getting a bunch of attention, is like the rogue prosecutors, which is basically prosecutors who refuse to prosecute violators of existing laws, or they'll even come out with these laws we're not going to, like these 15 different laws we're not going to prosecute. So do you think that's an issue, and how serious of an issue do you think that would be, or that is?
I think it's an issue. I think it's a serious issue. I also think it's a complex issue because depending on who's looking at it, they're seeing something very different. We watched a video in class that focused on a woman who was talking about the bail system.
Yeah.
And that barge in the East River
Mm-hmm.
that has several hundred men on it who are there because they can't pay bail for non-violent crimes, almost exclusively black or brown, and they're incarcerated because they can't pay bail. They are not there because of violent felonies, non-violent felonies in some cases. And you think about what being sentenced to that means. Almost certainly, you've lost your job.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a family, they may have well have lost their housing. They're on welfare. Your kids may not be eating. And you wonder about the bail system.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the other side of the coin, if you want to do that, at the activist prosecutors who believe you should be released without bail. There was something that was on the evening news for several weeks, a couple of months ago, about 3 or 4 people in New York who were videotaped beating and kicking police officers who were down on the ground, and they were all released without bail. Think about that barge, and think about those guys.
Yeah.
Is the system broken? Yes, but in more ways than one.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. And that was actually the next thing I was going to go to, was talking about the bail reform. That one video is especially moving. The specific case that was looked at in that
young man.
Yeah. And it was just insane to think that that's a possibility of what could happen, and it's literally a barge in the river, which is an insane thing to think about. Especially when you see the video and it shows the barge and all the different things. Yeah. It's a tough topic because I feel like there's certain things, and then what shocked me, I guess, was reading the 15 crimes of, I forget which one it was, and there was some of them that just felt like, all right, this is not something that needs to be looked at in that way. Like how is publicly beating up a cop not something that is not included in that?
Yep.
You would think that
or
it
the
would
young
be.
Man who ended up being arrested for riding his bicycle on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
If you or I were riding our bicycle on the sidewalk and a policeman stopped us, hopefully we wouldn't respond inappropriately. But I can envision responding with an attitude.
Yeah. I had it happen to me this year, yeah.
And if you do it, and you're not you or me, you could end up on that barge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's something I guess like is always interesting to think about and look at. Because I had literally, I was on my scooter. They said I was running red lights, is what it was. Which, to be fair, I probably was. And I was always, obviously being respectful, but it took a lot because I was like, it's 11 o'clock at night, man. I'm trying to go to sleep. I'm coming home from work. I was like, no one's on the road. Like what? But yeah, that's definitely something that is it's also, I think, the police job is such a tough job because you probably hear stories of how these tiny little things turn into something where it ends up with a shootout or all types of crazy stuff that happens. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of on edge position that can be tough.
Yeah.
And that's something I guess that would be a big thing where that was one thing that confused me about in the like George Floyd situation was how that became. I guess it makes sense of initially a logical conclusion that the police are bad, defund the police, but then it's like, well, if you think they're bad, giving them less is going to make them even worse. It's like you know what I mean. So you would almost the logical decision would be like, we need to figure out a way to make this better in certain ways.
Yep. To do a better job of selection, a better job of training, to make the compensation more attractive. Everything you would do to make the public K through 12 system better, you could argue would make policing better.
Mm-hmm.
And accepting the fact that neither the system nor the people in it are going to be perfect. If you or I were held to a standard of, we both know what good behavior is and bad behavior, and if we ever don't exhibit good behavior, there's something wrong with us. Mm-hmm. Well, yes, we knew the difference. I can't explain why either one of us didn't do what we should have done, but we didn't. And I think we put increasingly police officers and teachers, healthcare workers, in very bad positions. And I don't know what the answer is. I think part of it would be easier for teachers and police to do their job if we did our job as parents. They'd end up with less on their plate, and when they had to deal with bad behavior, if they had grown up as your child or my child, hopefully when the police stopped them, their response would be very different than what it might otherwise be. That said, I don't think it's realistic to expect the systems we're talking about to function perfectly. And if I think about how it was different when I was your age, we didn't have the public media coverage of day-to-day life that we have today.
Yeah.
If, God forbid, there had been a sound crew on me 24/7 my entire life, I probably wouldn't be sitting where I'm sitting today.
Yeah. No, that's something I think with like social media now, like there's just, instead of the news at night, it is literally news all the time. Anytime you want it, anytime. And it gets to the point where it's almost, you kind of are not making up things, but shifting some things around to make it sound better, to try to get a good story or whatever it may be in different ways. And everything you say can be inspected by millions of people, especially if you're a powerful figure who people are looking to find faults and find a way to do it. There's so many different ways to come at you.
And much of the time, if not most of the time, if we could have increased visibility of all of the good that a K through 12 teacher or an overworked police officer or a healthcare professional does, we'd be better off, because we're looking at jobs where I don't see how a K through 12 teacher can control their response to some of what they encounter, knowing if they appropriately discipline a child, that there will be a complaint filed with the principal, and they'll have to defend themselves.
Yeah.
What your mom and dad deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and there's definitely, like, it used to always surprise me in class, in, like, the way that some people just did not care about what, like, they just didn't care about what they said and what, in whatever ways. Sometimes it was funny and it would be like meant funny. Then other times it would just be like, that's just not smart. Like, why would you do that? But then it's to the point of, where you're at the point of why does it matter? And that's what I was actually talking to the same guy. Me and him roomed together, so we talked a lot about a bunch of different things. But we were just talking about how, like, he was explaining to me, people that don't know, like, how to go, like, apply to college and all this stuff. And I was like, the process isn't, like, difficult to, like, you can look up how to apply. It's not hard to find that information. Like, it's a Google search. He was like, I understand that, but when you're in the areas of trying to finish this and barely even finishing high school, but you're not really trying to do it, but you just don't really care about it, you're not thinking about going to college. Why would you? That's not what you're thinking about. You're not thinking about that in any way. And it's more of getting that initial thing to then actually the actual process of applying. And that's not what I was talking about. It's actually getting the idea in your mind that that's something you want to do and something you need to do.
Yeah. And again, you and I, although we grew up at different times, grew up in different worlds than many young people grew up in today. As I said, my mom and dad didn't graduate from high school, but I grew up in a family where I better do my homework. Mm-hmm. And there was not a discussion about whether or not I wanted to go to college. You are going to go to college. Mm-hmm. This is not a democracy.
Yeah.
And we both had the benefit of growing up in strong families. But what happens if you grow up in a single-parent household, with a mom who's working 2 jobs?
Yeah.
And you're going to a relatively weak elementary school in a low-income, probably with more crime and violence neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of stuff is the experiences you have around you. And even I've seen exactly the point of, even with those experiences around you, people with good families and good parents be different than that. And they understand why that's different from that. And it's almost like it gives you an example of me. Like, we had in my high school 2 different kids get arrested for capital murder. And one of them was a really good football player, like an insanely good football player. And it was just insane to be at practice and the coach having to tell you that. And then the situation is, because that's the thing, especially when you hear it, it's so, like, that's so negative and so, like, seems like evil in a way. But and you hear the story of what happened, and I'm not trying to defend it in any way because it's still basically an armed robbery is what happened. But it was multiple people. He didn't even do it, but he was the oldest one and got with the charge. So it's kind of like a situation where you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, even though you did make multiple bad decisions to get there.
And it's not just a life-changing, it's a life-defining
especially
event.
I'm pretty sure he got convicted with life, which is, it's just incredibly sad. Sad both ways, obviously, because, an actual crime. And the same thing with the other way was over. I think the other one was over an iPhone, which is insane to me. But that's kind of stuff that happens. We had a kid that was on a full scholarship, I'm pretty sure, to Auburn to play football, and he got arrested for armed robbery. And it's like, what was that thought process? Like, that thought process doesn't make sense. But if you're around different people and do different things, it's just what you do. It's not a bad decision. It's just what you do. It's just what happens. And there's that. It goes from playing there to making a decision like that to then I see him on different Snapchat stories on showing guns and, like, flashing money, and it's just like, this isn't a good look into the future in certain things. And obviously there's ways to be smart and do certain things like that, but armed robbery is not smart in any way. Nope. That's for sure. But all right. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for teaching the class this year. This was
Thank you for being in it. As I told you several times, you and Alex and Riley and 1 or 2 others made that class better for your classmates, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.